Hello, this is Nick Roach. We're outside again. There might be some noises from the wildlife. It's been a bit windy, but I've got this new furry buffer on the microphone, so hopefully that will stop the wind noise. I'd like to say a few words today about the self. The self. Now, there can be a lot of confusion on the groups and the forums about this. We have phrases, a term, self-realization. We also have the term no self, which you may or may not have heard. We've had the idea that one needs to get rid of their self in order to become enlightened and become free. And then you have the term from Ramana Maharishi and others, abiding in self, where everything is self. So how can you be no self, getting rid of self, free of self, and be abiding in self? All have these as the same endpoint. And of course, as usual, it's just language, just words. But I'll say a few words about it. You see, in some teachings, particularly Eastern teachings, they have two selves. They talk about the lower self, which is the personality, the likes and dislikes, the opinions, beliefs, the attachments, the unhappiness, the regrets, the place most people live most of the time. And we've got what they've called the higher self, which is the one being behind it all, the impersonal, the infinite. Okay? So they have two, and if we start with that, when looking at the self, things can start to make sense. So when we have the term self-realization, we're of course not realizing the lower self, the one with all the unhappiness. That's silly, we're already that. We're realizing the higher self. And the idea is eventually the lower self, the unhappiness, etc., falls away, or the lower self gives up and surrenders, which is actually what happens. It doesn't go away at all, it just gives up and becomes in line with the higher self. So one feels they're abiding in self, in the sense that what is left of their living experience is the experience of being that which is behind it all. And one is literally the being behind everything, but it's not the being as in a separate being. The experience is, it is me, I, the one, hence the term in itself. It's not you're realizing somebody else's self, another self, something separate. It's your own being you realize, which was always there. But what also happens, as you saw perhaps noticed from my fingers when I said the lower self becomes in alignment with the higher self, the experience is no longer two selves. There's no longer the lower self, where one is unhappy and thinking and worrying, and then the higher self, where someone is taught to be still and feel within and feel the peace, the sense of being. And that is two different experiences, but they merge to become one and the same. They are one experience. One self remains. Hence, abiding in self is where the small personal lower self becomes in alignment with the being behind it all, the higher self. So what remains is I am not just the lower self, and I'm not just the higher self. I'm not one of those two, but I'm both together at the same time. And that's how the personal lower self can still exist within the personal, impersonal being, higher self behind it all. I say this because I've had conversations with people who say they don't believe that someone can realise and become the infinite, the absolute, the higher self behind it all while they're alive. Because they say you can't be personal and impersonal. You can't be the impersonal, the higher self while you're alive. You're only ever a part of it. That's not true, of course. Because there is only one and you are that. But what's happening is as I've said, the lower self gives up enough eventually to what's left is the one being which you always were, the higher self behind it all. There was only ever one. You were always that. It's just you're sinking deeper and deeper into the experience, the awareness of what was always looking out of your eyes, what was always watching all your thoughts and feelings, and when everything was going on, it was just watching. The bit that was always watching is what you sink into so much you realise that is the same bit behind everything. And some people call that no self, because the personal lower self has given up, and because it's no longer separate, the assumption is it's gone, it doesn't exist anymore, it's gone. Well, of course it hasn't gone, because if it had gone totally, all that would be left is pure being, and there'll be no one to say anything, no one to say yes please, I'd like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or some ice cream or whatever it is you like. The personal self remains, but it's no longer complaining to the one being, I don't like this, I'm not happy about this, I want something else, this is all wrong, this isn't right, I don't want this. It's given up. So there's no longer the little personal self and the higher self as two opposites. They're just one experience of being aware, of being yourself. But it's not the little self anymore. But it's not just the big self either. It's an amalgamation, a combination of the two. They're no longer separate, hence the term non-duality, which gets bandied around the forums and groups sometimes. They're not two selves anymore. And some might argue there never were two selves because they don't acknowledge or recognise the one being as the higher self. And that's just playing with words again. There aren't two. There's no longer the little me and the one being behind it all. It's no longer there. There's only one self. And you realise that you are that. It's only your two polarities, the bit that's doing all the thinking and worrying and living life, and the awareness watching it all, which you think is so peaceful and pure being and effortless. They merge into one. So you've still got the little you aware of being aware in the body, and yet at the same time you're aware that you are this entire existence, the place and beyond. Everything that happens does so within this great mind and being and space which you are. Not because you believe it, just that's what happens. That's all I wanted to say. There's no need to get confused about what self, which self, who's doing what, who's self-realised, who's at the state of no self, whether there's a self or whether there isn't, it doesn't matter. All that's happening is through being conscious, as I described, for example. The attachment to being separate is being dissolved, so the lower self, the little self, the opinions, the beliefs, are just giving up, till eventually all that's left is being aware, and they come together. You are still you, you don't disappear. Again, some have said this, there's no one here, I disappeared. Well, someone is aware that you disappeared. Someone, something is still there looking, see, oh, that's not there anymore. See, you're still you. Aware that something has given up or falling away. So even in this no self, this neo-advaita saying there's no self and nothing here, even in that, the fact that you're aware that something was there which you used to call you and now it's gone, shows that you are still there to know that something is gone. I'm not playing with words, honestly. It's you continue to be you. What changes is the opinions and the beliefs, the attachments to everything give up, and you live more and more consciously and aware till eventually you are the one space, the self with a big S, the one being behind it all, while still maintaining your individuality. You're still you. Thank you.